In 1995, a lone mountain man adopted 3 abandoned girls. 30 years later, something shocking happened. It all started on a frozen night in the high country, when a quiet hermit found 3 crying infants beside a burned-out wagon. He thought he saved them from danger. But now, decades later, the danger has come back. A church bell rings. Hooves thunder down a dusty street. The oldest girl, now the town's sheriff, finds a body in the pines, marked exactly like the crime that left her and her sisters orphaned. And that's when the truth hits. The killer from the old days never died. He's been hiding in plain sight, watching the sisters grow, waiting for the right moment to strike again. Then a whispering note appears on a cabin door, calling one sister by name, promising to finish what was begun. As fear spreads across the town, if the man who murdered their real family has returned after 30 years, what does he want with the girls now? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The bitter winter wind howled through the Colorado highlands, driving needles of snow against Caleb Drayton's weathered face. His horse picked its way carefully along the narrow mountain trail, hooves crunching through the fresh powder that had been falling steadily since noon. The old mountain man hunched deeper into his wool coat, his thoughts focused on the warm cabin that waited just a few miles ahead. At 68 years old, Caleb had lived alone in these mountains for nigh on 2 decades, finding peace in the solitude after years of serving as a smoke jumper. The simplicity of mountain life suited him. Just him, his horse, and the quiet communion he found with his maker among the towering pines. The snow squall intensified as evening approached, thick flakes swirling in the failing light. Caleb squinted through the whiteness, grateful that he knew these trails well enough to navigate them even in such conditions. His horse suddenly lifted its head, ears pricking forward. That's when he heard it. A sound so faint he might have missed it if not for years of training his ears to the whispers of the wilderness. A cry, high and thin, barely carrying over the moan of the wind. Caleb reined his horse to a stop, listening intently. There it came again, the unmistakable wail of an infant. "Whoa there, girl," he murmured, guiding his mount off the trail toward the sound. The snow was deep here, and the horse had to work to push through the drifts. As they crested a small rise, Caleb's heart clenched at what he saw below. A freight wagon lay on its side, half buried in snow. One wheel stuck up like a broken spoke against the gray sky, slowly collecting white powder. No horse in sight. No movement except... There it was again. That cry weaker now. Caleb dismounted quickly, his old joints protesting as he trudged through knee-deep snow, towards the wagon. The tracks around it told a story his experienced eyes could read all too well. Multiple horses had been here recently, their riders dismounting in haste. 2 sets of tracks led down slope toward the valley, while one doubled back along the ridge. "Lord have mercy," he breathed as he reached the wagon. The cry came from within, muffled by layers of canvas and wood. Caleb worked quickly to clear snow and debris, his heart pounding harder with each infant wail that grew fainter. When he finally pulled back the torn canvas, his breath caught in his throat. 3 tiny babies lay bundled together in blood-stained quilts, their faces red from crying and cold. Newborns, by the look of them, probably no more than a few days old. "Easy now, little ones," he soothed, checking each bundle carefully. The blood on the quilts wasn't from the babies. They appeared unharmed, though dangerously cold. His experienced hands told him they were all girls, triplets most likely, given their size and similarity. Caleb's mind raced as he assessed the situation. The snow was falling harder now, and darkness would soon be complete. The nearest town was 15 miles away, too far to risk with such young infants in this weather. His cabin was closer, maybe 3 miles up the mountain. He gathered the bundles close, tucking them inside his coat as best he could. "Hang on, little ones," he murmured. "We'll get you warm soon enough." The ride home was slow and treacherous. Caleb held the babies against his chest with one arm while guiding his horse with the other. The infants had grown quiet, dangerously so, and he could feel their tiny bodies shivering against him. Finally, the familiar shape of his cabin emerged from the swirling snow. Caleb had never been so grateful to see its solid log walls and the thin curl of smoke still rising from the chimney. He'd banked the fire before leaving that morning, thank Providence. Inside, he worked quickly. The fire blazed up with fresh logs, and he arranged the babies close to its warmth, but not too near. He unwrapped them carefully, checking each one for injury. 3 identical faces, perfect and small, their eyes screwed shut against the lamplight. "Well now," he said softly, "what sort of trouble have you little ones gotten into?" He warmed some water and used clean cloths to wash them gently, wrapping them in fresh blankets from his own bed. The blood-stained quilts he set aside, evidence of whatever violence had brought these innocents to his care. As he worked, his mind turned over the scenes at the wagon. Those tracks told of pursuit and flight, of riders searching. Something about it raised the hair on the back of his neck. Why would anyone abandon 3 newborn babies in the dead of winter? And why had those riders scattered so hastily? He was heating some milk from his morning's supplies when he heard it, the distant crunch of hooves in snow. Caleb moved silently to the window, peering out into the darkness. His years in the wilderness had taught him to trust his instincts, and right now every one of them was screaming danger. Through the falling snow, he caught glimpses of movement, 3 riders circling at a distance, searching the ridgeline. They moved with purpose, checking each draw and hollow. Hunting. Caleb's blood ran cold as understanding dawned. They weren't looking for survivors. They were making sure there weren't any. And if they found his cabin with 3 newly rescued infants. He stepped back from the window, his heart heavy with the weight of decision. The right thing would be to take them to town come morning, turn them over to proper authorities. But those riders were still out there, and something told him these babies wouldn't be safe in town. Too many eyes, too many loose tongues, too easy for hunters to find their prey. Caleb sank into his old rocking chair, watching the 3 tiny bundles sleeping near the fire. "Lord," he prayed aloud, his voice rough with emotion, "I sure could use some guidance here. These little ones need more than an old mountain man can give them, but—" He trailed off, watching as one of the babies stirred, tiny fingers reaching out from her blanket. Through the long night, he kept vigil. The riders passed close twice more, but his cabin, tucked into a natural fold of the mountain, remained hidden from their search. As dawn began to paint the eastern sky in pale gold, Caleb knew what he had to do. He couldn't take them to town. Whatever darkness had orphaned these girls was still hunting them, and he wouldn't deliver them into its hands. But he couldn't stay here either. His cabin was too exposed, too close to known trails. Moving with the deliberate efficiency of long experience, Caleb began to pack. Extra blankets, all his spare clothes, his winter gear, and every bit of food he could carry. He had a line cabin another 20 miles up the mountain, far more remote than this one, used mainly during summer hunting. It would be rough, but with proper preparation, they could wait out the winter there. As he worked, his mind cataloged everything they'd need. He'd have to find a way to get milk and other supplies eventually, but he knew these mountains better than anyone. There were routes that only old trappers remembered, ways to move without being seen. The babies began to stir as morning light filled the cabin. Caleb paused in his packing to tend to them, warming milk and awkwardly trying to feed 3 hungry infants at once. "You'll have to be patient with me," he told them softly. "Been a while since I had cause to care for anything smaller than a horse." One of the girls grabbed his finger while feeding, holding on with surprising strength. Caleb felt something shift in his heart. A protective instinct he hadn't known was still there after all these years alone. "Don't you worry," he whispered, looking into eyes that seemed far too wise for one so young. "Old Caleb's got you now. Ain't nobody going to harm you while I'm breathing." The morning grew brighter, and Caleb knew they needed to move soon. He had already spent too long in one place. The riders might have withdrawn with the dawn, but they'd be back. Men who would hunt babies through a snowstorm wouldn't give up easily. He fashioned a sling to carry the infants close to his body, using soft furs and blankets to keep them warm. His pack was heavy with supplies, but he'd carried worse loads in his younger days. The horse was strong and rested, and he knew the way. As he prepared to leave, Caleb took one last look around the cabin that had been his home for so many years. The simple furniture he'd crafted with his own hands, the shelf of well-worn books, the familiar tools hanging on the walls. He didn't know if he'd ever see any of it again. But when he looked down at the 3 tiny faces nestled against his chest, he felt a certainty that transcended his doubts. These girls had been placed in his path for a reason. Maybe it was time for the old mountain man to become something else, a protector, a guardian, a father. With a silent prayer for strength and guidance, Caleb Drayton stepped out into the morning light, leaving behind the simple life he'd known for a new path he'd never expected to walk. The snow had stopped, and the sun sparkled on fresh powder as he mounted his horse and turned toward the high country. Behind them, the cabin stood silent in the morning light. No smoke now rising from its chimney, no tracks leading away from its door. By nightfall, the snow would cover all sign of their passing, and the mystery of the 3 abandoned babies would fade into mountain legend. But for Caleb and his precious cargo, the journey was just beginning. Dawn broke pale and hesitant over Silver Cross Ridge, the mining town still half asleep under its blanket of fresh snow. Caleb Drayton guided his horse carefully down the main street, mindful of the precious cargo nestled in his saddle panniers. He'd fashioned a sort of nest from wool blankets, protecting the 3 infant girls from the worst of the cold and the jolting ride. The courthouse stood at the end of the street, its weathered boards and tall windows a statement of civilization's reach into the frontier. Caleb had avoided the place for years, preferring the simplicity of his mountain solitude. But today was different. Today he needed the law's protection for these tiny lives that Providence had placed in his care. He dismounted stiffly, his muscles protesting the long, cold ride. The babies stirred as he lifted the pannier, their small sounds muffled by wool. "Easy now," he murmured, adjusting his hold to keep them stable. "We're almost there." The courthouse was empty save for the clerk, a young man who looked up startled as Caleb's snow-crusted boots crossed the threshold. "Sir, can I help you?" "Need to see Judge Albright," Caleb said, his voice rough from disuse. "Tell him Caleb Drayton's calling." The clerk hesitated, but something in Caleb's steady gaze made him hurry toward the judge's chambers. Moments later, Judge Albright himself appeared in the doorway. He was a tall man with iron-gray hair and keen eyes that had seen their share of frontier justice. Those eyes widened slightly at the sight of Caleb. Drayton, he said quietly. Been a few years. That it has, Your Honor. Caleb shifted his burden, and one of the babies let out a thin cry. Got a matter needs your attention, if you've got the time. Judge Albright's eyebrows rose at the sound, but he simply nodded and gestured toward his chambers. Come on back. The judge's office was warm, a pot-bellied stove burning steadily in the corner. Caleb carefully set his bundle on the broad desk and began unwrapping the blankets. 3 identical faces emerged, pink-cheeked from the cold but healthy-looking in the morning light. Judge Albright leaned forward, studying the infants with careful attention. I assume there's a story here. Caleb told it, leaving out only the dark riders who'd searched the night. He described finding the overturned wagon, the tracks in the snow, the 3 abandoned babies who would have frozen to death within hours. As he spoke, one of the girls reached out and caught his finger, holding on with that same surprising strength he'd noticed before. The judge watched this interaction closely. You're asking for legal guardianship? Adoption, Caleb corrected, meeting the judge's gaze steadily. Full and proper. Judge Albright sat back in his chair, studying the mountain man he'd known for over 2 decades. You understand what you're asking? Raising 3 children isn't like tracking game or running trap lines. They'll need schooling, proper care, a future beyond the mountains. I understand. Caleb's voice was quiet but firm. Been living alone a long time, Your Honor. Maybe too long. These little ones need someone to protect them, provide for them. I aim to do that. The judge was silent for a long moment, his fingers drumming thoughtfully on his desk. Finally, he spoke. You saved my life once, Drayton. Back in '58 when those outlaws had me cornered in Thunder Canyon. Never did pay that debt. Wasn't looking for payment then or now, Caleb said. Just asking for your help making this proper and legal. Judge Albright nodded slowly. The territorial statute allows for adoption in cases of abandonment, particularly when the children's lives are at risk. He pulled out several sheets of paper and began writing. We'll need to record their names for the document. Caleb hadn't planned names yet, but looking at the 3 tiny faces, they came to him naturally. Mara, he said, touching the first girl's cheek. Lark, his hand moved to the second, and Juniper. The third baby gurgled as if in approval. The judge's pen scratched across the paper as he drafted the adoption documents. When he finished, he pushed them across the desk. Sign here. This grants you full guardianship under territorial law. The girls will be legally recognized as your daughters, with all rights and privileges thereof. Caleb's hand trembled slightly as he took the pen. His signature was rough but legible, years of isolation having given him little cause for writing. As the ink dried, he felt the weight of what he'd done settle over him like a warm blanket, terrifying and comforting all at once. The judge sanded the signatures and carefully folded the papers, handing one copy to Caleb. Keep these safe. They're your daughter's proof of identity and your right to raise them. He paused, then added more softly, God go with you, Drayton. You've taken on a mighty task. Much obliged, Your Honor. Caleb tucked the papers inside his coat, close to his heart. He rewrapped the babies carefully, making sure each was secure and warm. Before leaving the courthouse, he headed to Miss Carter's mercantile. The bell above the door jangled as he entered, and Sarah Carter looked up from her ledger. Her eyes widened at the sight of the bundles in his arms. Mr. Drayton, is everything all right? Need some supplies, he said, shifting his burden. Milk, if you've got it, cloth for diapers, and quilts, small ones. Understanding dawned in Sarah's eyes as one of the babies made a soft sound. Without a word, she began gathering items: tins of condensed milk, soft flannel cloth, 3 tiny quilts with cheerful patterns. She added a few extras, a box of safety pins, some soft wool yarn, a book about infant care. "These should help," she said quietly, packing everything into a sturdy box. Do you need anything else?" Caleb shook his head, reaching for his money pouch. Sarah named a price well below the true value of the goods, but he knew better than to argue with her determined expression. The ride back to his cabin seemed longer, the weight of responsibility pressing heavier than any physical burden. The snow had stopped, but the sky remained heavy with the promise of more to come. Caleb kept alert, watching for any sign of the riders, but the mountain remained still and empty. By the time they reached the cabin, dusk was settling over the land like a purple shawl. Caleb worked quickly to get a fire going, warming milk and testing it carefully before feeding each baby. They took to the bottle eagerly, their tiny hands batting at the unfamiliar glass. "Mara," he whispered to the first, watching her determined expression as she drank. "Lark," to the second, who made soft cooing sounds between swallows. "Juniper," to the third, whose grip on the bottle was already strong and sure. Once they were fed and changed into clean cloth diapers, Caleb laid them on his bed, surrounding them with pillows to keep them safe. He moved through the cabin, checking windows and finally boarding the door securely. The night pressed close against the glass, and somewhere in that darkness he knew riders might still be searching. But inside, the fire crackled warmly, and 3 tiny girls slept peacefully, unaware of the magnitude of the day's events. Caleb sat in his rocking chair, watching over them, the adoption papers still resting against his heart. He was no longer just a mountain man, no longer simply a survivor of the wilderness. He was a father now, with all the fierce love and protective instinct that title demanded. The wind whispered around the cabin's corners, and Caleb listened intently, sorting ordinary night sounds from potential threats. But for now at least, there was only peace, broken occasionally by the soft sighs of sleeping infants. His daughters, legal and proper, protected by law and love alike. His hand strayed to the papers in his coat, touching them as if to reassure himself this was real. The trembling in his fingers had stopped, replaced by a steady certainty. Whatever came next, whatever challenges lay ahead, he would face them as a father should, with courage, wisdom, and unwavering devotion to the 3 precious lives now entrusted to his care. The morning after the adoption, Caleb woke before dawn, his mind already mapping out the routines they'd need. 3 hungry cries merged into one urgent chorus. He moved through the dim cabin with purpose, warming milk over the banked coals while speaking softly to each girl. "Easy now, little ones. Papa's got a system in mind." He tested the milk's temperature on his wrist, then lifted Mara first. "Oldest to youngest, that'll be our way." Though they were likely born minutes apart, he'd named them in an order, and that order would help him keep their needs straight. While Mara drank, he kept his free hand on Lark's belly, then Juniper's, soothing their impatience. When Mara finished, he shifted to Lark, then finally Juniper, learning their different ways of holding the bottle, their unique, small sounds. The winter sun was barely touching the peaks when he bundled them into a makeshift sling across his chest. His morning rounds couldn't wait, even with 3 new lives depending on him. The goats needed milking, the snare line needed checking, and he had to keep smoke from the chimney thin and pale to avoid drawing attention. "We'll be quick," he promised, covering them well against the cold. "Papa's got a timing to work out." Days fell into a pattern. Feed, change, check snares, tend goats, feed again. Between tasks, he carried them as he split wood, repaired tools, and prepared food. Their weight against his chest became as familiar as his own heartbeat. When the spring thaw came, bringing mud and the first green shoots, Caleb adjusted their routine. He built a sturdy pen beside his chair, where the girls could watch him work while staying safe from the cabin's hazards. They were rolling over now, batting at the wooden toys he carved during the quiet evenings, simple horses, birds, and stars. Summer brought their first attempts at crawling. Mara led the way, determined to reach a dropped toy. Lark followed, more cautious but steady. Juniper watched her sisters, then suddenly shot across the floor one morning, startling a laugh from their usually quiet father. "Well now," Caleb said, scooping her up. "Reckon you were just waiting for the right moment." Their first words came like gifts. Paw from Lark, up from Juniper, and more from Mara, each one carefully noted in Caleb's memory. He found himself talking more than he had in years, naming everything they touched, teaching them simple prayers before meals. "Lord, bless this food and keep us safe," he'd say, helping them fold tiny hands. "Thank you for your care." Every few months, when supplies ran low, Caleb would rise well before dawn to take them into Silver Cross Ridge. He wrapped them in hooded cloaks, timing their visits to avoid the busiest hours. Miss Carter always had their usual order ready: milk, cloth, medicine for teething pain. But during their third summer, Caleb overheard whispers in town. Strangers asking questions about 3 young girls. He gathered their supplies quickly and didn't return for nearly 6 months. Instead, he relied on his Ute neighbors, the few he'd built careful friendships with over decades. Trading furs and jerky for cornmeal and dried berries, they never asked why he kept the girls so close, but their eyes held understanding. Many remembered their own children being taken by authorities who claimed to know better. The girls' birthdays, the day he'd found them, became a quiet celebration each year. He'd carve special toys, 3 matching dolls one year, tiny animals the next. They'd share honey on cornbread, and he'd tell them abbreviated stories of how they became his daughters, careful to leave out the darker elements. "The Lord brought you to me in the snow," he'd say, watching their eyes shine in the firelight. 3 perfect gifts I hadn't known to pray for. By 1875, when the girls turned 5, they filled the cabin with life and movement. They helped with simple chores, feeding chickens, gathering eggs, sorting berries. Their personalities grew more distinct. Mara, the leader, always first to try new things. Lark, the peacemaker, humming as she worked. Juniper, the observer, taking everything in with quiet intensity. Caleb began teaching them their letters by lamplight, using the Bible as their primer. They traced verses with small fingers, sounding out words together. He taught them to write their names in the dirt with sticks, then on slate when Miss Carter supplied it through their Ute trading partners. They learned to move quietly in the woods, to watch for signs and signals. Caleb never told them exactly why, but they absorbed his caution naturally. When he tensed at unexpected sounds, they froze. When he moved them quickly inside, they didn't question. They developed their own silent language of gestures and looks, understanding instinctively when to be still and quiet. Their world was small, but rich. The cabin, the garden, the nearby stream where they learned to fish, the berry patches they visited in summer. They knew every tree around their home, named the family of deer that visited their salt lick, and could identify birds by their calls. Caleb taught them to respect the land and its creatures, to take only what they needed, to give thanks for every blessing. He showed them how to read weather in the clouds, how to find north by the stars, how to treat cuts with yarrow and upset stomachs with mint tea. "The good Lord provides," he'd tell them, pointing out useful plants, Our job is to learn his gifts and use them wisely." They rarely saw other people. Occasionally, their Ute neighbors would visit, teaching the girls words in their language, showing them how to weave small baskets. These visits were precious breaks in their isolation, though Caleb always stayed alert, watching the trails. One autumn morning, just after the girls turned 5, Caleb rose early to check his trap lines. The girls were still sleeping, their dark hair spread across shared pillows, breaths soft and even. He tucked the blankets around them more securely before stepping out into the pre-dawn chill. The sun hadn't yet crested the mountains when he found the tracks, fresh boot prints in the mud near the old wagon site where he'd found the girls. His heart clenched. He recognized the pattern from 5 years ago, the same heavy tread. Someone was still searching, still hadn't given up. Caleb stood motionless, reading the signs. The tracks were from yesterday, made by at least 2 men. They'd circled the old wagon remains, then moved along the ridge, as if trying to reconstruct that night's events. A crow called overhead, breaking his concentration. Caleb turned back toward home, moving quickly but carefully to avoid leaving clear tracks. His girls would be waking soon, wanting breakfast, eager to start their day of lessons and chores. They had no idea that their peaceful world balanced on such a precarious edge. Inside the cabin, he found them already up, feeding scraps to the cat that had adopted them last spring. They looked up with bright smiles, secure in their father's love and protection. Caleb forced himself to smile back, to maintain their routine, even as his mind raced through preparations they might need to make. "Time for prayers," he said, gathering them close. "Then we'll see about breakfast." They folded their hands automatically, 3 dark heads bowed beside his silver one. As they repeated the familiar words, Caleb added his own silent prayer for continued safety, for wisdom to keep them from harm, for the strength to face whatever might come. The morning sun finally broke over the mountains, flooding the cabin with light. Another day began in their small, carefully guarded world. For now, they were safe, together, and that would have to be enough. The morning after finding those tracks, Caleb woke before dawn. He moved through the full cabin quietly, packing essentials while his daughters slept. They had a second cabin, more remote, built during those first cautious years. He'd maintained it secretly, keeping it ready. "Time to wake, little ones," he called softly. "We're going on an adventure today." The girls stirred, rubbing sleep from their eyes. They didn't question when he helped them dress warmly, when he led them to the horses before breakfast. They'd learned to trust his judgment, to move quickly when needed. The backup cabin lay 3 ridges deeper into the wilderness, tucked into a narrow valley where 2 creeks met. The approach required crossing water several times, making tracks harder to follow. Caleb had chosen the spot carefully. Multiple escape routes, good visibility, natural barriers. They reached it by mid-morning. The girls' eyes widened at the sight of the small cabin, weathered to match the surrounding rocks. "This is our secret home," Caleb explained, helping them down from his horse. "Sometimes we'll need to stay here instead of our regular cabin. It's part of keeping safe." The girls explored while he unpacked, finding the root cellar already stocked, the stone fireplace ready for lighting, comfortable beds built into the walls. He'd planned for this day, hoping it would never come. Life settled into new patterns. They still tended gardens and animals, but more carefully now. Caleb taught them to watch for signs of visitors, to move without leaving traces, to signal danger with bird calls. 3 years passed quietly. The girls turned 8, growing tall and strong. Caleb began teaching them to ride properly, not just sitting in front of him, but controlling their own mounts. He'd traded for 3 gentle ponies, chosen for their sure feet and calm temperaments. Sit straight, he'd remind them, leading them through exercises in the hidden meadow. Feel the horse's movement, let your body follow. Mara took to riding naturally, her quiet confidence matching her pony's steady nature. Lark was more hesitant, but determined, humming softly to herself and her mount. Juniper threw herself into learning with characteristic intensity, pushing to go faster. Try more. Patience, Caleb would say, reining her in. Speed comes after skill. When they turned 10, Caleb made a difficult decision. They needed more education than he could provide. After weeks of observation and careful planning, he enrolled them in Silver Cross Ridge's small church school. Remember, he told them that first morning, stay together. Be friendly but careful. If anything feels wrong, signal me. He watched from the smithy across the street, where he'd arranged to help with repairs while they studied. The town had grown in the years they'd stayed away. New buildings, new faces. But the school remained small, just 12 students in total. That first day brought an unexpected connection. Jonas Nez, nephew of the agency blacksmith, sat alone at recess. He was their age, serious-faced, watching everything with careful eyes. When Lark offered to share their lunch, a friendship began. "My uncle says your father is a good man," Jonas told them. "He respects the old ways, knows how to listen to the land." The girls flourished in school, each in her own way. Mara absorbed everything, especially numbers and maps. Lark discovered the church's small organ, begging to stay after lessons to practice. Juniper excelled in reading, but struggled to sit still, preferring hands-on learning. Years flowed by, marked by small changes. The girls grew taller, their dark hair longer, their personalities more distinct. Mara, now 14, helped younger students with their sums, showing early signs of the leader she'd become. Lark's music filled the church on Sundays, her shy nature forgotten when she played. Juniper learned tracking from Jonas's uncle, combining Caleb's teachings with native wisdom. Caleb aged, too, his beard whitening, lines deepening around his eyes. But he never relaxed his vigilance, never stopped checking for signs of danger. They still used the hidden cabin sometimes, maintaining it carefully, practicing quick departures. The town slowly accepted them, though questions lingered. Whispers followed about their origins. 3 dark-haired girls with a silver-haired mountain man for a father. But the girls' gentle manners and Caleb's quiet competence earned respect, if not complete trust. "They're good girls," Miss Carter would say when newcomers asked. "A credit to their father, whoever he was before." By 1885, the girls were 15. They'd grown into young women who turned heads. Mara with her calm authority, Lark with her graceful movements, Juniper with her fierce energy. They still rode to school together, still stayed close, but their world had widened carefully. That autumn, fire broke out in the canyon where Caleb had found them. Lightning struck dead pines, sending smoke across the valley. Caleb stood watching from their cabin porch, memories flooding back, snow and blood, tiny bundles, desperate choices. The girls noticed his tension. They'd learned to read him like he'd taught them to read weather. They gathered close, offering silent support. "Everything all right, Pa?" Mara asked quietly. Caleb pulled his gaze from the smoke. "Just memories," he said. But something deeper stirred, an old instinct warning him that the past wasn't finished, that somewhere in the darkness, threat still waited. That evening, he checked their emergency supplies, like he hadn't done in months. The girls watched but didn't question, understanding some things didn't need words. They'd grown up in the shadow of unspoken danger, learned to balance caution with living. They sat together after supper, Lark practicing hymns on her lap harp, Mara mending, Juniper whittling like he'd taught her. Caleb looked at his daughters, strong, capable, still innocent of the darkness that had nearly claimed them as infants. The fire in the canyon burned for 3 days, then died in autumn rain. But its smoke had stirred something loose, like ash rising from banked coals. Caleb felt it in his bones, in the way the wind carried winter's first chill. Time had passed, his girls had grown, the town had accepted them. But as he watched the last wisps of smoke drift away, Caleb knew. Some fires never truly die. They just wait, smoldering, for the wind to wake them. The morning after the canyon fire, ash dusted the ground like early snow. Caleb stood in his doorway, watching his daughters saddle their horses for the ride to town. At 17, they moved with the easy grace of skilled riders, checking cinches and adjusting stirrups without needing his guidance. "Mind your home before dark," he called, though they knew the rule by heart. Mara nodded, her dark hair neatly braided. "Sheriff Wallace asked me to help organize the land claim records today." "I've got choir practice after school," Lark added softly, securing her lap harp to her saddle. Juniper swung up onto her pinto. "Meeting that survey crew at noon. They want to map the western passes." Caleb watched them ride out, 3 strong young women where once there had been 3 helpless infants. Times were changing. The town needed them, and he couldn't keep them hidden forever. Still, caution ran deep in his bones. In Silvercross Ridge, the girls went their separate ways. Mara headed to the sheriff's office, where Wallace had been teaching her the finer points of territorial law. The old lawman had taken a shine to her steady nature and quick mind. "There you are," Wallace greeted her, gesturing to a stack of papers. "Land disputes getting worse with all these newcomers. Need someone who can keep these records straight." Mara settled at the desk, carefully sorting through homestead claims and water rights. Her methodical approach reminded Wallace of her father. Same careful attention to detail, same quiet way of studying people. At the church, Lark gathered her young students around the pump organ. "Let's try the new hymn again," she encouraged, playing the opening notes. The children's voices rose sweet and clear, filling the small sanctuary. Jonas Nez paused in his work at the smithy across the street, listening to the music drift through his open door. At 25, he'd grown into a respected craftsman, combining his uncle's traditional teachings with new techniques. His eyes often strayed to the sheriff's office, where Mara's silhouette showed through the window. Juniper met her survey crew at the appointed time, leading them up into the high country she knew better than any map. "Watch your footing here," she warned, guiding them through a treacherous scree slope. "Mountain's not as solid as it looks." The surveyors appreciated her knowledge, even if some bristled at taking orders from a young woman. But Juniper had earned her reputation as one of the best guides in the territory, and smart men listened when she spoke. By 1888, the railroad survey crews arrived in force. They brought with them an influx of strangers, engineers, laborers, and camp followers. The quiet mountain town buzzed with new energy and new dangers. One afternoon, a well-dressed man lingered at the sheriff's office, asking about old cases. "Particularly interested in crimes from about 18 years back," he said smoothly. "Working on a book about frontier justice?" Mara kept her face neutral as she sorted through files, but her heart quickened. The man's questions circled too close to the year of her birth. Wallace noticed her discomfort. "Records from back then ain't reliable," he told the man gruffly. "Fire took most of them in 72. That evening, Caleb listened to Mara's account with growing concern. "Best stay clear of that one," he advised. Similar conversations followed when other strangers showed too much interest in the past. The town continued growing. A telegraph office opened in 1889, connecting Silver Cross Ridge to the wider world. New businesses appeared: a proper hotel, a second general store, even a photographer's studio. Through it all, Jonas remained a steady presence in their lives. He shared Mara's love of justice, Lark's appreciation for quiet moments, and Juniper's connection to the land. But it was Mara who drew him most strongly, though neither spoke openly of their growing feelings. "Your father taught you well?" Jonas told her one afternoon, as they rode back from delivering supplies to a remote homestead. "Few people understand both town ways and mountain ways." Mara smiled, touched by his observation. "Pa says understanding comes from listening, to people and to the land itself." Their friendship deepened naturally, built on shared values and mutual respect. Caleb watched their interaction carefully, but found no cause for concern. Jonas carried himself with the same careful awareness that had kept the girls safe all these years. By 1890, the girls had grown into the heart of community life. Mara's work at the sheriff's office earned her increasing responsibility. Lark's music ministry expanded to include wedding celebrations and funeral services. Juniper's guidance kept survey crews and hunting parties safe in the high country. On a quiet Sunday evening in that 20th year since finding them, Caleb sat on their cabin porch, watching his daughters in the fading light. Lark practiced a new hymn, while Mara and Juniper played checkers. They were women now, strong in their own ways, ready to make their mark on the world. But as darkness settled over the mountains, Caleb felt that familiar unease. The same instinct that had warned him of riders in the snow 2 decades ago whispered that his girls still weren't safe. The past was patient, and some dangers only slept. He watched them laugh together, these precious daughters of his heart, and silently renewed his promise to protect them. They'd grown beyond hiding, but the shadows that haunted their beginning still lingered, waiting. The evening deepened into night. Inside the cabin, Lark's music drifted sweet and clear through the open window. Mara and Juniper's good-natured argument over the checker game brought a smile to Caleb's weathered face. But his eyes kept scanning the darkness beyond their lamplight, watching for whatever might come. The morning sun cast long shadows across Main Street as Mara Drayton crossed to the sheriff's office. Spring of 1890 brought fresh challenges to Silver Cross Ridge: new settlers, land disputes, and the constant flow of prospectors seeking their fortune in the high country. Sheriff Wallace looked up from his desk as she entered, his weathered face creasing into a smile. "Just the person I wanted to see," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. The office smelled of coffee and gun oil, familiar scents after years of helping with paperwork and prisoner transport. "What's on your mind, Sheriff?" Mara settled into the worn wooden chair, noting the way Wallace seemed to be studying her with unusual intensity. "Been thinking on something important." He leaned back, rubbing his gray-streaked mustache. "Getting on in years, and this job needs younger legs than mine. Been watching you work these past years. Way you handle folks, how you think things through." Mara waited, sensing there was more to come. "Reckon you ought to consider running for sheriff when I step down." Wallace held up a hand as Mara started to protest. "Now hear me out. You know the law better than most men twice your age. People trust you. That's worth more than any badge." "But I'm—" Mara hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "There's never been a woman sheriff in the territory." "Maybe it's time there was?" Wallace's eyes crinkled. "Think on it. That's all I'm asking." Over the next months, Mara did think on it. She accompanied Wallace on his rounds, watching how he handled everything from minor disputes to serious threats. They rode the high passes together, checking on remote homesteads and keeping the peace between cattle drives and sheep herders. "You've got good instincts," Wallace told her one afternoon as they tracked a horse thief through Campbell's Creek. "Notice how you always check the ground ahead of looking at the horizon? That's mountain thinking, same as your pa taught you." At home, Caleb listened to her uncertainty with his usual quiet patience. "What troubles you most about it?" he asked one evening as they sat on the porch. "Being responsible for so many lives," Mara admitted. "What if I'm not ready?" "Wasn't ready to be a father to 3 baby girls," Caleb said softly. "Sometimes readiness comes in the doing, not before." Her sisters offered their own encouragement. Lark, gentle as always, reminded her of their mother's old hymnal. "Remember what Pa always says is written inside? Be strong and of good courage. You've got both, sister." Juniper was more direct. "Town needs someone who knows both justice and mercy. That's you." In the summer of 1892, Wallace made his retirement official. "Time to let younger folks take the reins," he announced at a town meeting. Several men immediately declared their intention to run, eyeing the badge with varying degrees of ambition. Jonas found Mara after the meeting. "You're still considering it?" he asked, falling into step beside her. "Seems presumptuous," she replied, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. "Town might not be ready for such a change." "Change comes whether we're ready or not," Jonas said thoughtfully. "Question is who helps guide it." His quiet confidence in her abilities touched something deep in Mara's heart. The next Sunday, Pastor Matthews stopped her after services. "Been praying about the sheriff's position," he said. "Keep coming back to something my grandmother used to say. God doesn't call the qualified, He qualifies the called." Through the fall and winter, Mara attended town meetings and engaged in public debates with the other candidates. She spoke of justice tempered with understanding, of protecting the weak while respecting the law. Her words carried the weight of experience earned through years of service. Some opposed her candidacy openly. "Woman's place is in the home," declared Marcus Tully, owner of the new hardware store. "Sheriff's work ain't suitable for their delicate nature." "Delicate?" Juniper snorted, having once guided Tully's hunting party through a blizzard. Mara tracked down Jim Wheeler's stolen horses in the middle of winter. Didn't seem too delicate then. Support came from unexpected quarters. The widow Chen, who ran the laundry, spoke up at a town meeting. "My husband killed in mining accident 10 years ago. Who helped me file claim papers? Who made sure company paid fair? Miss Drayton, that's who." Old Joe Martinez, who drove the mail wagon, added his voice. "Seen her calm down 3 drunk cowboys without drawing her pistol. That's the kind of sense we need." The election was held in January of 1893. Snow fell steadily as townsfolk gathered to cast their votes in the courthouse. Mara spent the day checking on elderly residents, making sure they had wood and supplies to weather the storm. When the votes were counted that evening, Mara had won by 15 votes, narrow but clear. The courthouse erupted in cheers and congratulations, though some men stormed out in protest. Caleb stood quietly in the back, eyes shining with pride as Wallace pinned the deputy's badge on Mara's coat. "Years apprenticeship before taking full office," Wallace explained. "Time to learn the deeper workings of the job." That year passed in a blur of activity. Mara worked alongside Wallace, handling everything from breaking up saloon fights to negotiating grazing rights between ranchers. She proved herself level-headed in crisis and fair in judgment. Jonas watched her grow into the role with quiet admiration. "You're good at this," he told her one afternoon as they repaired fence line at the Peterson place. "Seeing all sides of things, finding the path to peace." "Learned that from Pa," Mara replied, testing the wire's tension. "Way he'd listen to all 3 of us squabbling then help us see each other's hurts. Spring of 1895 dawned clear and cool. The whole town gathered at the little whitewashed church for the swearing-in ceremony. Sunlight streamed through the windows, catching the silver of Wallace's badge as he prepared to pass it on. Mara stood before the altar in her best dress, her sisters flanking her like guardian angels. Lark's eyes shone with tears of joy, while Juniper fairly burst with pride. In the front pew, Caleb sat straight and tall, his weathered face serene. Pastor Matthews opened his Bible, the same one from which he'd taught the girls their letters years ago. "We are gathered here today," he began, "to witness a new chapter in the history of Silver Cross Ridge." The morning light filled the church with golden promise as Mara raised her right hand to take the oath. Her voice rang clear and strong, echoing off the wooden walls. "I do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the office of Sheriff of Silver Cross Ridge and will to the best of my ability preserve, protect, and defend the laws of this territory." Wallace stepped forward, unpinning his badge for the last time. The silver star caught the light as he placed it in Mara's steady hands. "Take good care of our town," he said softly. "I will," Mara promised, fixing the badge to her coat. The metal felt warm against her heart, heavy with responsibility and trust. The church filled with applause as Pastor Matthews pronounced the ceremony complete. Lark and Juniper embraced their sister, their three heads close together just as when they were small. Caleb waited his turn, then wrapped all three daughters in his arms, his joy too deep for words. Outside, the spring sun blessed Silver Cross Ridge with warmth and light. Townspeople gathered to shake Mara's hand and offer congratulations. Even some who had opposed her election seemed willing to give her a chance to prove herself. Jonas was one of the last to approach. "Sheriff Drayton," he said with a small smile, touching his hat brim. "Town's in good hands?" Mara looked around at her community, the weathered buildings, the familiar faces, the mountains standing guard under the morning sky. This was home. These were her people, and she would serve them with all the strength and wisdom she possessed. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Silver Cross Ridge as townsfolk dispersed from the swearing-in ceremony. Mara stood on the church steps, still adjusting to the weight of the silver badge on her coat. Several people lingered to chat, sharing stories of Wallace's early days as sheriff. The peaceful moment shattered as hoofbeats thundered down Main Street. A ranch hand from the Carter spread pulled his lathered horse to a stop, nearly falling from the saddle in his haste. "Sheriff," he called out, his voice cracking. "Sheriff Drayton." Mara was already moving, her boots clicking on the wooden steps. "What is it, Tommy?" The young man's face was pale beneath his tan. "Body, ma'am. Up near the forest boundary. One of our hands found it while checking fence lines." Deputy Crane emerged from the sheriff's office, buckling on his gun belt. "Want me to ride out with you, Sheriff?" "Yes," Mara nodded, her mind already shifting to the task. "Tommy, catch your breath. We'll need exact directions." Jonas appeared at her elbow, his expression grave. "I'll come too. Might need tracking skills if there's sign to read." Within minutes, they had horses saddled. Mara paused only long enough to tell her sisters she'd miss the celebration dinner planned for that evening. Caleb watched from the church steps, his weathered face showing concern. "Be careful," he said quietly as she mounted up. "Always am, Pa." The small group rode north, following Tommy's lead. The spring afternoon was warming, but a cool breeze still whispered through the pines. After about 40 minutes, they approached the Carter Ranch's northern boundary, where it met national forest land. "Just over that rise," Tommy pointed, "near the lightning-struck pine." Mara took the lead, scanning the ground as they approached. The dead pine stood like a sentinel, its bleached trunk splitting the sky. Beyond it, a dark shape lay crumpled in the grass. "Stay back," she ordered, dismounting to approach on foot. Jonas followed, his practiced eyes reading the ground. The victim was a man, probably in his 40s, dressed like a traveler. No obvious signs of robbery. His boots were good leather, a silver watch chain still hung from his vest. But the manner of death made Mara's blood run cold. Around the man's neck, angry purple bruising showed where something thin had been pulled tight. His hands were bound with similar marks. On his chest, placed with deliberate care, lay a small object, a charm made of twisted grass and feathers. "Jonas," Mara said softly, "what do you make of this?" The blacksmith knelt, studying the charm without touching it. "Not Navajo work, not Ute either, but someone wanted it to look tribal." Deputy Crane circled the scene, notebook in hand. "No signs of a struggle here. Body was moved after death." Mara nodded, fighting back a wave of memory. She'd seen something like that charm before, drawn in the margins of her father's journal. He'd never explained it, changing the subject whenever she asked. "Tommy," she called, "ride back to town. Have Doc Morrison bring his wagon. We'll need to transport the body proper." As the ranch hand galloped away, Mara and Jonas documented the scene. The victim's pockets held a few coins, a railway ticket stub from Denver, and a letter addressed to James McKintrick. "Looks like he was staying at the Palmer House in Denver," Crane noted, "headed south, maybe to Santa Fe." The afternoon light was fading by the time Doc Morrison arrived with his wagon. They carefully loaded the body, preserving the evidence as best they could. The charm Mara wrapped in her handkerchief, storing it carefully in her saddlebag. As they prepared to leave, a small voice called out, "Sheriff Drayton." 10-year-old Billy Peterson ran up, out of breath. He helped his family work the neighboring ranch. "Billy, what are you doing out here?" Mara asked. "Was helping Pa check cattle," the boy explained. "Earlier today I saw someone, a rider heading toward the old canyon trail." Mara's heart skipped. "What time was this?" "Morning, before church. Tall fellow on a dark horse, riding real quiet-like." Jonas caught her eye, his expression troubled. "Which direction was he headed?" "South, toward the canyon. Same way those old wagon trails go." Mara thanked Billy and sent him home. The wagon started its slow journey back to town, Crane riding escort. She and Jonas lingered, studying the lengthening shadows. "You're thinking what I'm thinking?" Jonas asked quietly. "That charm," Mara said. "Pa had a drawing of one just like it. Never would talk about it, but I saw it once when I was little, in his journal from 1870. The year he'd found them. Back in town, they delivered the body to Doc Morrison's surgery. The main street was quiet now, most folks home for supper. Light spilled from the sheriff's office windows as Mara unlocked the door. "I need to check something," she told Jonas. "Old territorial records." He nodded, settling in to help. Together they pulled out dusty ledgers and reports, stretching back 25 years. Mara knew what she was looking for. She'd seen Wallace consulting these books late at night sometimes. Hours passed. Oil lamps burned low. Finally, in a report from 1870, she found it. Her hands trembled as she read the details of bodies found in Thompson Canyon. 3 victims, all with ligature marks, each with a twisted grass charm placed on their chest. The cases were never solved. The only witness had fled north, dying of exposure before she could make a full statement. But she'd mentioned a group of riders, moving at night, leaving their terrible signatures behind. "Jonas," Mara whispered, "these wounds, they're identical. The charm, the rope marks, everything. He leaned in to read, his shoulder warm against hers. 25 years is a long time to wait between killings. Unless, Mara's voice caught. Unless they never stopped, just moved around, never staying in one place long enough to draw attention. She thought of Caleb, of his constant vigilance when they were small. The way he'd taught them to watch for strangers, to stay together, to know every escape route from town. He'd known. All these years, he'd known what might come hunting. Mara closed the ledger, her mind racing. Tomorrow she would need to send telegrams, check for similar cases in other territories. And somehow, she would have to find a way to ask her father about the darkness that had followed them for 25 years. But that was tomorrow's work. Tonight she had a murder victim waiting for justice, and a killer's signature that echoed back to the very beginning of her life. Jonas touched her arm gently. "Whatever this is," he said, "you don't face it alone." Mara nodded, grateful for his steady presence. Outside, the spring night deepened over Silvercross Ridge. Somewhere in that darkness, old wounds were bleeding fresh, and ancient debts were coming due. Morning sunlight slanted through the sheriff's office windows as Mara sorted through the stack of incoming telegrams. Her fingers paused over one marked urgent from Fort Garland. The paper crackled as she unfolded it, her eyes scanning the carefully typed message. Charm matches description. Stop Brotherhood of Destiny active, 1860-1870. Stop believed disbanded after Thompson Canyon murders. Stop detailed records. En route by courier. Stop exercise. Extreme caution. Stop. Mara read the message 3 times, her heart beating faster with each pass. The Brotherhood of Destiny. She'd heard whispers of that name in her father's nightmares when she was small. The office door creaked open, and Jonas stepped in, carrying his leather tool pouch. "Brought my magnifying glass," he said quietly. "Thought we might want a closer look at that charm." Mara retrieved the handkerchief-wrapped bundle from her desk drawer. They cleared space on her desk, and Jonas carefully unwrapped the twisted grass and feather ornament. Under the morning light, Jonas studied the charm through his glass, his fingers moving with practiced precision. "See these grass stems? They're wheatgrass, but not the kind that grows around here. This variety only grows in the deep canyons south of town." He pointed to tiny red threads woven through the pattern. "And these fibers, they're from a specific type of Indian paintbrush that only blooms in Thompson Canyon." "The canyon where Pa found us," Mara whispered. Jonas nodded gravely. "Whoever made this either gathered materials there recently, or they've been keeping a collection of supplies from that area for years." Mara paced the office, her boots clicking against the wooden floor. "I need to talk to Pa. He's kept this burden long enough." "Want me to come with you?" She shook her head. "This needs to be family first, but stay close to town today?" "Always do," Jonas replied, his dark eyes warm with understanding. The morning was warming as Mara rode the familiar trail to her father's cabin. Caleb was in his workshop, carefully sanding a new chair spindle. At 68, his beard was snow-white, but his hands were still steady at his craft. He looked up as she approached, reading her expression with the same skill he'd once used to read weather on the mountain. "Reckon it's time we talked proper about that night," he said softly. Mara settled on a workbench, watching wood shavings curl from his knife. "The charm we found yesterday. Fort Garland says it matches an old outlaw brotherhood, one that was active when you found us." Caleb set his tools down carefully, as if the memories themselves might shatter if handled too roughly. Brotherhood of Destiny, they called themselves, started during the war, far as anyone knew. Group of men who believed violence was sacred, that killing made them stronger, gave them power to shape the future, He stood, brushing sawdust from his shirt. "Let's go inside. This tale needs telling proper." In the cabin's familiar warmth, Caleb built up the fire while Mara made coffee. When they were settled, he continued, his voice low and careful. "That night in 70, when I found you girls, I saw signs I didn't want to believe. The wagon had been stopped deliberate. No accident about it. There were 3 sets of tracks leading away. 2 riders fleeing downslope, probably your real folks, and 1 doubling back." He paused, sipping his coffee. "The blood on those quilts you were wrapped in, it wasn't from birthing." Mara's hands tightened around her cup. "The killers were hunting Mama and Papa?" "Hunting them, caught them, and left their markers behind. Those charms, they'd leave them on their victims, claiming the deaths as part of their destiny. But finding 3 baby girls alive?" Caleb's voice roughened. "That changed something for them. Their leader, fellow they called the Patriarch, he believed it was a sign, that one of you was meant to carry on their legacy." "That's why you hid us away," Mara whispered. "Why you were always so careful about strangers." Caleb nodded. "For years I'd spot signs, tracks near the old wagon site, strangers asking too many questions in town. The Brotherhood was supposed to be finished after 70, but I knew better. Knew they were still searching, still believing in their twisted calling." "And now they're back," Mara said. "Or maybe they never left." She stood, pacing the familiar room where she'd learned to walk, to read, to pray. "I need to check something in town. The registry of residents. Everyone who's moved here since 70. Caleb's weathered face creased with worry. "Be careful, daughter. These men, they're patient. They can wait years, decades even, building trust before they strike." Mara hugged him tightly, breathing in the familiar scent of wood shavings and pipe tobacco. "I will, Pa, I promise." Back in town, the afternoon was waning as Mara spread out the town registry books on her desk. Jonas had returned, bringing sandwiches and coffee from the hotel restaurant. "What exactly are we looking for?" he asked, settling in to help. "Anyone who arrived between 1870 and 1875, Mara explained. "Especially men who seem to have no clear reason for coming here, or whose background stories don't quite add up." They worked through the afternoon, checking names against property records, marriage certificates, and business licenses. As the sun began to set, Mara's finger stopped on an entry from 1872. "Thomas Blackwood," she read aloud. "Bought the old Miller place out on Cottonwood Creek. Listed his previous residence as Denver, but..." She pulled out another document. "Here's a warrant circular from Kansas Territory, 1868. Looking for a Timothy Blackthorne, wanted for murder. The description matches, and look at this detail. Victims found with strange ornaments on their chests." Jonas studied the documents. "That's awful close to the same name." "And here's something else." Mara opened a newer ledger. Blackwood served on the town council from 1880 to 1885. He was respected, trusted. Then he stepped down, saying he wanted a quieter life. But he kept his house, kept paying taxes. He's still here, Jonas, living quiet all these years right under our noses. She sat back, her mind racing. The Brotherhood didn't die out. They just scattered, found new names, new lives, waiting for whatever twisted destiny they believed in. Jonas's expression was grim. And now something's made them active again. Through the office window, they could see lamps being lit along Main Street as evening settled over Silver Cross Ridge. Somewhere in those familiar streets, in one of those peaceful homes, a killer had been waiting for 25 years. Mara gathered the documents carefully. "First light tomorrow. We need to ride out to Cottonwood Creek. See what Mr. Blackwood's been up to all these quiet years." "I'll be ready," Jonas said simply. They locked up the office as night fell. The town settled into its evening routine. Families at supper, saloon piano playing softly, moths dancing around the new electric street lamp by the hotel. Everything looked normal, peaceful. But Mara knew better now. Under that peaceful surface, old wounds were bleeding fresh, and a patient evil had finally decided to show its hand. Morning sunlight streamed through the sheriff's office windows, catching dust motes in its golden beams. Mara sat at her desk, reviewing reports from the previous night's patrols. Nothing unusual had been spotted around town, which somehow made her more uneasy rather than less. The floorboard by the door creaked. Mara looked up to see Juniper standing in the doorway, her sister's usual confident stance replaced by something more hesitant. She held a small wooden box against her chest like a shield. "June? What brings you by so early?" Mara asked, noting the shadows under her sister's eyes. Juniper closed the door carefully behind her. "I need to show you something, Mara. Something I should have shown you months ago." Her voice was barely above a whisper. Moving to the desk, Juniper set down the box. Her hands trembled slightly as she lifted the lid. Inside, arranged in neat rows, lay dozens of folded papers. "They started coming about 6 months back," Juniper explained, pulling out the first letter. "Always at dawn, always on the front porch." Mara unfolded the paper. The handwriting was precise, almost artistic in its careful strokes. Her breath caught as she read the words. "You belong to the mountain." "There's more," Juniper said, passing over another. "They come every few weeks." Mara read the second note. "Your blood was chosen." The third made her hands go cold. "Follow the old path." "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Mara asked, trying to keep the tremor from her voice. Juniper sank into the chair across from the desk. "I didn't want to worry Pa. He's gotten more anxious lately, watching the trails, checking the doors at night. And part of me..." She wrapped her arms around herself. "Part of me thought I was imagining things, that maybe it was just some admirer being poetic." "June." Mara stood and moved around the desk, placing her hands on her sister's shoulders. "This is exactly the kind of thing you need to tell me, not just as your sister, but as sheriff." "I know that now." Juniper's voice cracked. "But after you found that body with the charm, after what Pa told you about the Brotherhood..." She drew a shaky breath. "I realized these might be connected." Mara returned to her desk, opening the drawer where she kept the territorial reports. She pulled out the yellowed pages of the Brotherhood's manifesto, recovered years ago from an abandoned hideout. Laying it beside Juniper's letters, her heart sank. The handwriting was identical. Every curve, every flourish matched perfectly. A knock at the door made them both jump. Jonas entered, his expression grave. "Mara, we need to talk. There's been a sighting." He stopped short, seeing Juniper's tear-streaked face and the papers spread across the desk. "Come in, Jonas," Mara said. "Close the door." He approached cautiously, his eyes taking in the scene. "What's happened?" "Someone's been leaving messages for June." Mara handed him one of the letters. "For months now. The handwriting matches the Brotherhood's documents." Jonas studied the paper, his jaw tightening. "This timing isn't coincidental. I just came from talking to old Pete, the trapper. Says he spotted a stranger up near Thompson Canyon yesterday evening." "Near the old sect camp?" Mara asked sharply. Jonas nodded. "Pete said the man was just standing there, staring at the ruins, wearing a long black coat despite the warm weather. When Pete called out, he didn't answer, just turned and walked into the trees like he knew exactly where he was going." Juniper made a small, frightened sound. "The letters. They always mention the mountain." The old paths. Mara moved to kneel beside her sister's chair. June, listen to me. We're not going to let anything happen to you, but I need you to be extremely careful. No more solo rides into the high country. No walking alone after dark. You think... Juniper's voice faltered. You think they chose me? That's what these letters mean? Jonas spoke softly from where he stood. The Brotherhood believed in passing down their legacy, in choosing heirs to carry on their work. But why me? Juniper's words came out as a sob. Why not Mara or Lark? Mara squeezed her sister's hand. Because you're the one who loves the mountains like they do. You know every trail, every cave. You can track and hunt as well as any man in the territory. She paused, choosing her next words carefully. They've been watching, June. Learning your ways, these letters, they're trying to draw you in. Make you feel like you belong to their twisted calling. Juniper shuddered. I feel sick. All this time I've been riding the trails alone, sleeping under the stars, never knowing someone was watching. Following. We'll post extra patrols, Mara said firmly. I want you staying with Pa for now, or here in town with me and Lark. I'll ask some of my cousins to keep watch too, Jonas added. They know those canyons better than anyone. Juniper nodded, wiping her eyes. What about Pa? Should we tell him? Mara gathered the letters carefully. Yes, but let me do it. He needs to know the danger is real now, not just old memories. I never should have kept this secret, Juniper whispered. All those months thinking I could handle it alone. You're not alone, Mara said fiercely. You've never been alone, June. Not since the night Pa found us in that snow. Jonas moved to the window, scanning the street. The town's waking up. We should get Juniper somewhere safe before too many people are about. Mara nodded. Take her to the church. Lark will be there practicing the organ. I'll send Deputy Crane to stand guard. As Jonas helped Juniper to her feet, Mara caught his eye. There was a depth of worry there that matched her own. Someone had spent months carefully laying groundwork, trying to lure her sister into darkness. And now, with the murder and the sighting at the canyon, it was clear they were done waiting. Juniper paused at the door, her face pale but determined. Mara, promise me something? Anything. Promise we'll find them, before they can hurt anyone else, before they can twist anything else that's good about these mountains into something evil. Mara touched the badge on her chest, feeling its weight. I promise, June. Whatever it takes. They watched through the window as Jonas escorted Juniper down the street toward the church. The morning sun cast long shadows behind them, stretching like dark fingers across the dusty road. Mara turned back to her desk, spreading out the letters one more time. Each careful stroke of the pen spoke of patience, of meticulous planning, of a darkness that had waited 25 years to resurface. Somewhere in her peaceful town, perhaps watching this very scene, was a man who believed he could turn her sister into a killer. She carefully folded the letters and locked them in her desk. There would be no more messages left in the dawn. No more solitary rides for Juniper. No more shadows moving unnoticed through their lives. The Brotherhood had made its first move. Now it was her turn to answer. Dawn painted the eastern sky in streaks of pink and gold as 4 riders gathered at the edge of Silver Cross Ridge. Mara checked her pistol one final time, running through the preparations in her mind. The old camp lay a good 6 hours north, deep in Thompson Canyon, where the Brotherhood had once held their rituals. Jonas rode up beside her on his paint horse. Trail's clear so far. No sign of fresh tracks. Good. Mara turned to where Juniper sat astride her black mare, Deputy Crane positioned protectively beside her. You sure about this, June? Juniper nodded. though her knuckles were white on the reins. "Those journals might tell us who he is, why he chose me. I need to know." They set out as the sun crested the ridge, riding single file along the narrow trail. Jonas led, his eyes constantly scanning the ground for signs. Mara followed, with Juniper and Deputy Crane bringing up the rear. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and sage. The terrain grew steadily more challenging as they climbed. Loose shale clattered beneath the horses' hooves. Twice they had to dismount and lead the animals around precarious drops. By mid-morning, the sun beat down mercilessly, and sweat dampened their clothes. "Hold up," Mara called as they reached a small meadow crossed by a clear stream. "We need to water the horses." They dismounted gratefully, leading their mounts to drink. Jonas spread out a worn map on a flat boulder while Mara joined him. "We're here," he said, pointing to a spot where the creek curved through the hills. "Old camp's about 3 hours further, just below that outcrop." Mara studied the terrain ahead. "Any other ways in or out besides this trail?" "2. Jonas traced lines with his finger. "Old game trail to the east and a steep descent to the west. Both rough going, but possible if someone knows the way." Deputy Crane brought over his canteen. "Should we split up? Cover more ground?" "No." Mara's tone was firm. "We stay together. If he's watching, that's exactly what he'd want, to separate us." They rested 30 minutes, checking cinches and redistributing supplies before mounting up. The trail narrowed further as they climbed, forcing them to ride single file again. The afternoon sun cast deep shadows in the canyon, making it harder to spot movement among the rocks. It was nearly 4 o'clock when Jonas raised his hand for them to halt. "Camp's just ahead. No smoke, no movement." They dismounted, tethering the horses in a grove of aspens. Mara drew her pistol, nodding to Deputy Crane to do the same. "Jonas, you and June stay close. Any sign of trouble, you get her out of here." The old camp lay in a natural bowl, sheltered by towering cliffs. 3 crude log structures still stood, their walls weathered gray. The roof had partially collapsed on one, letting pale sunlight stripe the dirt floor. "Someone's been here recently," Jonas said softly, examining the ground. "These tracks are fresh, maybe 2 days old." They approached the largest cabin cautiously. The door hung crooked on leather hinges, creaking as Mara pushed it open. Dust motes danced in the slanting light. The single room held a crude table, several chairs, and shelves lined with books and papers. "Over here." Juniper's voice shook as she lifted a stack of leather-bound journals from a trunk. "There's dozens of them." Mara took one, opening it carefully. The same precise handwriting from the letters filled the pages. She began reading aloud. "Spring 1875. The eldest girl shows too much caution, like her guardian. The youngest still wild, drawn to the high places. She will be the one. Blood calls to blood." Juniper sank into a chair, her face pale. "He's been watching us since we were children?" Jonas picked up another journal, leafing through it. "These go back years. Details about your daily routines, places you went." He stopped, pulling out several sheets of paper. They were crude but careful sketches. 3 little girls playing in a yard, a teenager on horseback, Juniper standing at the edge of a cliff with her hair blowing in the wind. The attention to detail was chilling. "Here's more," Deputy Crane called from a corner. He held up a bundle of papers tied with twine. "Looks like manifestos, ceremonies, rules of the Brotherhood." Mara took them, scanning quickly. Instructions for choosing an heir. It had to be someone who heard the mountains call, someone who could move through wild places without fear. She looked at her sister. "Someone like you, June." "But why?" Juniper's voice cracked. Why watch us for so long? Why not just— Because this isn't just about killing, Jonas said grimly. He wants to pass on his legacy, create a true heir who embraces his twisted beliefs. Mara tucked the most relevant journals into her saddlebags. We need to get back to town before dark. Crane, help me gather anything else that might— A horse whinnied in the distance. They froze, listening. Nothing but the wind in the pines. Time to go, Mara said tersely. Now. They mounted up quickly as the sun sank behind the western cliffs. Shadows lengthened across the canyon as they began their descent, riding closer together than before. Every snapping twig, every rustle of leaves made them tense. The moon rose, full and bright, as they reached more level ground. Its silver light made the trail easier to follow, but also left them exposed against the pale rock. 2 hours from town, Jonas suddenly reined in. There, he whispered, pointing to a distant ridge. Lantern light. They all saw it, a faint golden glow, moving slowly along the ridgeline parallel to their trail. Someone was up there, watching their descent. Keep riding, Mara ordered. Normal pace. Don't let on that we've spotted them. The last miles seemed endless. Every few minutes they caught glimpses of that bobbing light, always keeping pace with them. It vanished as they approached the outskirts of town, but Mara knew their observer was still there, somewhere in the darkness. They dismounted at the sheriff's office, legs stiff from the long ride. Inside, Mara locked the door and pulled the curtains while Deputy Crane lit the lamps. Juniper sank into a chair. Exhaustion etched on her face. Jonas began laying out the journals they'd recovered on Mara's desk. What do we do now? Juniper asked quietly. Mara looked at the pile of journals, 25 years of obsession and planning recorded in neat, precise handwriting. We read every word. We learn his patterns, his thinking, and we find him before he can make another move. The lamp flames flickered, making shadows dance on the walls. Outside, the town slept peacefully, unaware of the darkness that had stalked their streets for so many years. Mara touched one of the sketches of her sister, anger rising at the violation of their lives, their safety, their peace. The killer had spent decades preparing, watching, waiting, but now they had proof of his methods, his madness. The question was, would it be enough to stop him before he could claim his chosen heir? The sun had dipped behind the western peaks when boots scraped on the sheriff's office steps. Mara looked up from the scattered journals to see Jonas ushering in Caleb, her father's weathered face drawn with concern. I sent word as soon as we got back, Jonas explained, securing the door behind them. Caleb's eyes swept the room, taking in the pile of evidence on Mara's desk, then settling on Juniper, who sat wrapped in a wool blanket by the potbelly stove. His shoulders tensed. Tell me everything. Mara handed him one of Juniper's letters, then opened a journal to the sketches. As Caleb read, the color drained from his face. His hands trembled slightly as he touched one drawing of the girls as children, playing in the yard he'd built for them. All these years, he whispered, right under our noses. Deputy Crane cleared his throat. Sir, did you ever suspect that he was this close? No. Caleb's voice was rough. I watched for riders, strangers, not a man who'd worked his way into the town itself. He looked at Juniper. Those letters, when did they start? About 6 months ago, she said softly. Always before dawn. I'd find them on the porch. Never saw who left them. Caleb pressed his lips together, clearly fighting back anger at himself for not noticing. After a moment, he squared his shoulders. We can't stay in town tonight. Too exposed. Mara nodded. I was thinking the same. The cabin? Yes. Defensible position, clear sight lines. He turned to Jonas. "Would you ride with us? Another gun would help." "Of course." Jonas began gathering the journals into a saddlebag, while Mara collected ammunition and extra supplies. Within 30 minutes, they had loaded their horses and were riding out of town, taking a roundabout route to throw off any watchers. The moon cast enough light to navigate safely, but shadows seemed to shift and dance between the trees. Twice they paused to listen to distant sounds that might have been footsteps, or might have been deer. Caleb's cabin sat tucked against a granite outcropping, with a clear view of the approach from 3 sides. They stabled the horses quickly, then hurried inside. While Jonas and Deputy Crane checked the perimeter, Caleb and the sisters began securing the cabin. "Lark, check the pantry supplies," Caleb directed as he and Mara worked to board the windows. "June, help her inventory what we have." The familiar motions of nailing boards and checking ammunition had a steadying effect. This was what Caleb had prepared them for all those years, though he'd prayed they'd never need it. By midnight, the cabin was as secure as they could make it. A haunting howl echoed through the timberline. Juniper paused in arranging bedrolls near the fireplace. "Wolves? Maybe." Jonas stood at a gap in the boards, rifle ready. "Or maybe not." Another howl answered the first, this one closer. Mara saw Caleb's hand tighten on his Winchester. They all knew wolves rarely ventured this close to inhabited areas, especially in pairs. The night crept by in tense silence. They took turns watching, 2 hours at a time. Occasionally more howls drifted down from the ridgeline, sometimes near, sometimes far, as if circling. Between watches they dozed fitfully, starting at every creak of the cabin's timbers. Near dawn, Caleb checked his ammunition one more time. "We're running low. I've got more stored in my trapping shed about 2 miles north." He pulled on his coat. "I'll fetch it and be back by noon." "Pa, no." Lark gripped his arm. "Send Deputy Crane or Jonas." Caleb shook his head. "They don't know where to look. I've got it hidden careful-like." He cupped her cheek gently. "Don't fret. I've been running these ridges 40 years. No one knows them better." Mara stepped forward. "At least let me ride with you." "You're needed here." His tone was firm. "Keep your sisters safe. I'll be quick about it." They watched from the gaps in the boards as he mounted up and rode out, following a game trail that wound through the aspens. The sun rose fully, warming the cabin's log walls. The sisters tried to rest after the long night, but sleep came uneasily. By mid-morning, the howls had stopped. Jonas kept watch while Deputy Crane dozed in a chair. Lark heated coffee on the stove, while Juniper cleaned their rifles with practiced care. Mara found herself checking the sun's position every few minutes. When noon came and went with no sign of Caleb, worry began to gnaw at her stomach. She knew her father's habits. He was always precise about timing, especially in dangerous situations. By 1 o'clock, she could no longer sit still. "Something's wrong." She stood, buckling on her gun belt. "He should have been back hours ago." Jonas nodded grimly. "I was thinking the same." Mara crossed to the pegs by the door where her saddle waited. The familiar leather creaked as she lifted it, the sound somehow ominous in the quiet cabin. Her hands moved automatically through the motions of checking her ammunition and supplies. "Mara." Lark's voice quavered slightly. "What if—" "Don't." Mara turned to her sisters, seeing the fear in their eyes. "Pa's smart and careful. Could be he just had to take a longer route back to avoid being followed." But her gut told her otherwise. 25 years of watching, waiting, planning, the killer wouldn't be satisfied with just observing anymore. She had to find their father before it was too late. Mara's boots crunched on pine needles as she led her horse from the cabin. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the aspens, their leaves trembling in the mountain breeze. Behind her, Jonas helped Lark and Juniper mount up, while Deputy Crane secured the cabin. "We'll follow the game trail first," Mara said, swinging into her saddle. "Pa would have stuck to familiar paths." Jonas nodded, checking his rifle was properly seated in its scabbard. "I'll take rear guard. Deputy, you're sure about staying?" "Someone needs to watch the cabin," Crane replied, "in case he doubles back or tries to leave a message." They rode out in single file, Mara in front, then Juniper and Lark, with Jonas bringing up the rear. The game trail wound through stands of aspen and pine, gradually climbing toward the higher ridges where Caleb kept his trapping shed. Though they'd all visited it before, Mara found herself studying every shadow, every movement in the trees. The air grew cooler as they gained elevation. After an hour's steady riding, Mara raised her hand for them to halt. Through the trees ahead, she could make out the rough-hewn logs of the trapping shed. Caleb's horse stood quietly at the hitching post, head lowered. "Something's wrong," Juniper whispered. "Pa would never leave Thunder standing this long." Mara drew her revolver, noting how Jonas did the same. "Lark, stay with the horses. June, circle round back with Jonas. I'll take the front." They dismounted silently, tying their horses well back from the shed. Mara waited until Jonas and Juniper were in position before approaching the front door. It stood slightly ajar, unusual for their methodical father. Through the gap, she could see tools scattered across the workbench, another warning sign. "Clear out here," Jonas called softly from the back. Mara pushed the door open, wincing at its creak. The interior was dim, dust motes dancing in the thin shafts of light from the window. Her eyes swept the single room. Overturned chair, supplies knocked from shelves, signs of a struggle. On the workbench lay a crude charm made of leather and bone, fresh blood staining its surface. "No," Juniper breathed, stepping in behind her. "No, no, no." Mara reached for the charm, but Jonas caught her wrist. "Wait." He studied it carefully before picking it up with a cloth. "Could be poisoned. These markings, they're like the one we found on the murder victim." A piece of paper had been pinned beneath the charm. Mara's hands shook slightly as she unfolded it, reading the 4 words written in careful script. "Return what is mine." Juniper stumbled backward until she hit the wall, sliding down to sit heavily on the floor. "This is my fault," she whispered. "The letters, the watching, he wants me. And now he has Pa." "This is not your fault," Mara said firmly, kneeling beside her sister. "None of this is your fault. This man, he's been planning this for 25 years, since before you could walk." Lark appeared in the doorway, face pale. "I heard June cry out. What did you find?" Jonas showed her the note while Mara helped Juniper to her feet. They explained quickly about the charm and signs of struggle. Lark's hands twisted in her skirts as she listened. "We need to start tracking before we lose the light," Jonas said, already studying the ground outside the door. "There are boot prints here, 2 sets. One's Caleb's for sure. I recognize the wear pattern on the heel." Mara joined him, noting how the tracks showed signs of dragging. They went this way, toward the ravine. "He's taking him up to the old Brotherhood camp," Juniper said suddenly. At their questioning looks, she added, "Those journals we found, they talked about sacred places, spots where they performed their rituals. The camp was one of them." "Then that's where we'll find them." Mara's voice was steel. "Jonas, can you track in the dark?" He nodded. "Not as well as daylight, but yes. The moon's nearly full. It'll help." They gathered their supplies quickly, taking only what they could carry on horseback. The tracks led them up a steep ravine, the terrain growing rougher as they climbed. Pine branches closed over their heads, making the forest darker, more close. They had to dismount and lead their horses through the worst spots. Jonas moved slowly, carefully reading sign that Mara could barely see. A scuffed rock here, broken twig there. Twice they lost the trail completely and had to circle back to pick it up again. The sun sank lower, shadows lengthening across the rocky ground. "We should stop," Lark said as dusk deepened to true night. "We could miss important signs in the dark." "No." Juniper's voice was fierce. "Pa wouldn't stop if it was one of us missing." "June's right," Mara agreed. "We can't wait, but we need to rest the horses for a bit and plan our route." They found a small clearing off the trail, sheltered by a stand of thick pines. While Jonas tended the horses, Mara and her sisters gathered wood for a tiny fire, just enough to heat coffee and study their maps by. "The old camp is here," Mara said, pointing to a mark on the weathered paper. "About 4 miles up near Timberline. The ravine we're following should lead straight to it." "If that's where he's taking Pa," Juniper said, "why not just kill him at the shed? Why drag him all that way?" "Because this isn't just about murder," Jonas said quietly. "Those journals, the symbols, this is about ritual to him, about passing down some twisted legacy." He looked at Juniper. "He wants you to come to him. Caleb is just the bait." Lark touched Juniper's arm. "We won't let him have you." "No," Juniper agreed, checking her rifle with steady hands. "You won't have to, because I'm going to put a bullet in him first." They doused the fire after 30 minutes, giving the horses just enough rest to continue safely. Jonas lit a small lantern, shielding most of its light, but allowing enough to illuminate the ground directly ahead. The moon had risen, its silver light filtering through the branches above. Mara watched her sisters mount up, fear and determination warring in their expressions. They'd grown up with Caleb's warnings about nameless dangers, learned to shoot and ride and survive in the wilderness. Now those lessons would be tested. "Ready?" she asked softly. They nodded, and Jonas took the lead, lantern swaying gently as he guided them back to the trail. The horses moved carefully in the darkness, hooves finding purchase on the rocky ground. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, or perhaps something that only sounded like a wolf. Mara touched the grip of her revolver, drawing comfort from its familiar weight. They would find their father. They would end this shadow that had haunted their family for 25 years. And they would do it together. The trail wound upward into the darkness, and they followed, 4 riders moving like ghosts through the moonlit forest. Above them, the stars wheeled slowly in the night sky, watching their ascent into whatever waited at the old camp above. The moonlight cast long shadows through the pines as they followed Jonas's lead. Their horses' hooves made soft thuds against the rocky ground, each step bringing them closer to the old camp. The lantern's glow barely pierced the darkness ahead, but Jonas's keen eyes never left the trail. "The tracks are fresher," he whispered after another hour of climbing. "They're moving slower now, probably from dragging someone." Juniper's hands tightened on her reins. "Pa's still alive then. He has to be." The night seemed to stretch endlessly, but gradually the black sky softened to deep blue. As the first hint of dawn touched the eastern horizon, they found themselves entering a narrow box canyon. The walls rose sharp and steep on either side, squeezing them into single file. Jonas held up his hand, signaling them to halt. "This place," he said softly. "The old ones speak of it. They call it the Canyon of Echoing Shadows. Sacred ground, but dangerous. The walls trap more than just sound here." Mara studied the towering rock faces. "Why would he bring Pa to such a place?" "Power," Jonas replied. Men like him believe certain places hold old magic. They think it makes their rituals stronger. They continued forward until the canyon widened slightly. Through the growing light, they could make out a massive boulder ahead, and tied to it. "Pa!" Juniper started forward, but Mara caught her arm. "Wait," she hissed. "It's too exposed." They dismounted, securing their horses behind an outcropping. Caleb was indeed bound to the boulder, his head slumped forward. Even from this distance, they could see the bruising on his face and arms, but his chest rose and fell steadily. He was alive. "Welcome home, Juniper." The voice came from above them. A man stood on a natural shelf in the canyon wall, maybe 15 feet up. He appeared to be in his 50s, with graying hair and clothes that could have belonged to any rancher or merchant in town. His manner was calm, almost gentle, as he looked down at them. "I've waited so long for this moment," he continued. "Watching you grow, seeing your spirit emerge. You have your mother's fire." Juniper's face went white. "You knew my mother?" "I chose her, just as I chose you. But she wasn't strong enough for what needed to be done. You are." He gestured to Caleb. "This man stole you from your destiny, but now you can reclaim it." Mara and Lark moved closer to their sister, but Juniper stepped forward on her own. Her voice rang clear in the canyon. "The only thing Caleb Drayton stole was 3 babies who were about to die in the snow. He gave us life, love, and a real family." The man's smile didn't waver. "Blood calls to blood, child. You feel it. That's why you're drawn to the high places, why you can read the mountains better than any guide. That's your inheritance calling." "No." Juniper's hands were steady as she drew her rifle. "My inheritance is 25 years of Pa teaching me right from wrong. It's Mara showing me how to protect others, and Lark reminding me there's beauty in this world. That's the blood that matters, the kind you choose." The man's calm facade cracked. His face twisted with rage as he drew a revolver from his coat. "You ungrateful child, I've waited half my life to pass on our sacred duty, and you dare reject it?" "The only duty I have," Juniper said firmly, "is to the family that raised me. The one that showed me love doesn't need blood sacrifices or ritual murders, and I choose them." The man's hand tightened on his revolver. "Then you'll die with them, starting with the man who stole you." He swung his aim toward Caleb, but Juniper had already dropped to one knee, rifle braced. "Not my family," she said. "Not ever." The killer's rage exploded into motion. He lunged from his perch, revolver glinting in the dawn light. But Jonas was faster, years of smithing having honed his reflexes. He crashed into the man mid-leap, sending them both rolling across the rocky ground. Mara's pistol tracked their movement, steadily, waiting for a clear shot. The killer managed to throw Jonas off and scrambled to his knees, raising his revolver. Mara's finger tightened on the trigger. The killer's eyes met hers, dark and knowing. "Do it," he taunted, blood trickling from his split lip. "Show everyone what you really are. Be like us. End it right here." For a heartbeat, Mara saw red. This man had stalked her family for 25 years, had murdered innocent people, had hurt her father. The metal of her pistol felt warm in her hands, almost eager. "Sheriff," Jonas's voice came soft but clear. He had regained his footing, watching her carefully. "We don't become what we fight." The simple truth of those words washed through her like cool water. Mara took a deep breath, then spoke with quiet authority. "Drop your weapon. You're under arrest." The killer's face twisted in disgust, but before he could move, Jonas tackled him again. This time Lark was there too, kicking the revolver from his grip while Juniper covered them with her rifle. Together they wrestled him into submission. Mara pulled rope from her saddlebag and bound his hands securely. By the authority of territorial law, you're charged with murder, kidnapping, and 25 years of other crimes we'll sort out in court. While they secured the killer, Juniper ran to Caleb. She cut through his ropes with shaking hands, helping him sit up. "Pa, are you all right?" "Been better," Caleb managed, his voice rough. "Been worse too." He looked at each of his daughters in turn, eyes bright with pride. "My girls, my brave girls." They helped him stand, supporting him between them. Despite his bruises, Caleb insisted on walking to his horse under his own power. Jonas led the killer's mount, keeping their prisoner firmly between himself and Mara. The journey back was slow, the morning sun climbing high overhead as they picked their way down from the canyon. No one spoke much. Exhaustion had settled deep into their bones. But there was peace in the silence, a sense of long shadows finally fading. As the sun began its descent toward evening, the familiar buildings of Silver Cross Ridge appeared in the distance. The town's windows glowed warm against the approaching dusk, like welcome lights calling them home. They rode the final stretch as a family, weary but unbroken, changed but not destroyed. Justice had been served without vengeance, and mercy had proven stronger than hate. The killer would face the law, while they would face tomorrow together. Morning sunlight streamed through the iron bars of the territorial jail, casting long shadows across the wooden floorboards. 2 deputies stood guard, while Mara completed the paperwork that would send the killer to Fort Garland for trial. The telegraph key clicked steadily in the corner as confirmations arrived from the territorial court. "Circuit Judge arrives next Tuesday," Deputy Crane read from the yellow paper. "Says he'll personally oversee the transfer." Mara nodded, her pen scratching across the official forms. The weight of the past few days pressed heavy on her shoulders, but there was comfort in these ordinary tasks, in the system of law working as it should. Across town, the church bell rang clear and sweet, calling the community together. They came in ones and twos, ranchers and shopkeepers, miners and school children, all drawn by a shared need for solace. The wooden pews filled quickly as Pastor Moore opened his Bible. Caleb sat near the back, his face still bearing the marks of his ordeal. Though his body ached, his spirit felt strangely light. When Mara slipped in beside him after finishing her duties, he squeezed her hand gently. "Could I have a word with you?" he whispered. Together they stepped outside, finding a quiet spot beneath the aspen trees. 25 years ago, Caleb began, his voice rough with emotion, "I thought I was just doing what needed doing, keeping 3 little ones safe." He smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling. Never dreamed God had such a purpose in mind, raising up a sheriff who'd choose mercy over vengeance, 3 daughters who'd face down evil with courage and grace. Mara felt tears welling up. "You taught us that, Pa. You showed us every day." Behind the agency barn, Jonas carefully built a small fire in an iron brazier. Juniper stood beside him, clutching the bundle of letters that had haunted her for months. One by one, she fed them to the flames, watching the cruel words turn to ash. "They don't define you," Jonas said quietly. "Never did." Juniper nodded, dropping the last letter into the fire. "I know who I am, who my real family is." Through the church's open windows came the sound of Lark at the organ, her fingers moving gently across the keys. The familiar hymn drifted out over the town like a blessing. Inside, people began to sing softly, their voices joining together in harmony. Mara returned to her office as evening approached. She stood at the window, watching lamplight bloom in windows across town. The sound of children playing reached her ears, life returning to normal. Her family had faced their darkest fear and emerged stronger. Her father was safe. Her sisters were free from shadow, and their town had shown itself to be more than just a collection of buildings. It was a true community, coming together to heal. The organ music floated on the evening air, and Mara felt peace settle over her heart like a warm blanket. They had chosen light over darkness, mercy over vengeance. And in doing so, they had found their way home. The aspen leaves turned golden in the weeks that followed, their shimmer catching the September light. Peace settled over Silver Cross Ridge like a soft blanket, wrapping the town in quiet healing. At the Drayton cabin, Caleb rested in his favorite chair by the window, watching chickadees flit between the birch branches. His bruises had faded to yellow, and strength returned slowly to his limbs. The steady stream of visitors brought more than just nourishment. They brought friendship, acceptance, and belonging. "Another chicken pie from Mrs. Peterson," Lark announced, setting the still warm dish on the table. The aroma of sage and pastry filled the cabin. "Much obliged," Caleb said softly. "Folks have been mighty kind." Throughout those gentle days, neighbors arrived with stews and fresh bread, quilts and kind words. Even the crusty old miners brought offerings, jars of honey, fresh-caught trout. The town had claimed the Draytons as their own. At the sheriff's office, Mara found her authority had deepened. Where once a few had doubted a woman sheriff, now came respect from across the county. Ranchers tipped their hats, traders sought her counsel, and neighboring lawmen sent telegrams requesting her insights. "Got word from Sheriff McKenzie over in Summit County," Deputy Crane said one morning. "Says that gang of horse thieves gave up peaceful-like when they heard you were coming." Mara smiled, sorting through wanted posters. "Reckon sometimes just knowing the law is watching is enough." At the white-painted church, Lark's music program flourished. She added a children's choir, teaching them hymns in the cool mornings before school. Their sweet voices drifted through town, bringing joy to all who heard them. When the Territorial Education Board sent funds for more instruments, Lark nearly danced with happiness. "We will have fiddles and flutes by Christmas," she told her father, eyes shining. "Just imagine the carols we can share." Juniper found her own way to heal, by helping others stay safe. She began teaching wilderness skills to young girls, showing them how to read weather, track game, and spot danger. Twice a week, she led them on careful expeditions, building their confidence while keeping watch. "Always trust your instincts," she would tell them, demonstrating how to test ice or identify poison plants. "The land speaks to those who listen." Jonah spent more evenings at the Drayton cabin, his quiet presence a comfort to them all. He taught Juniper traditional stories about the canyons, helped Lark repair the church organ, and joined Mara on dawn patrols. His friendship with the family deepened naturally, like a river finding its true course. The weeks flowed smoothly into autumn. Harvest season painted the valley in russet and gold. Pumpkins appeared on porches, hay was stored for winter, and the evening air grew crisp with coming frost. On a Sunday evening in late October, the town gathered for a harvest celebration at the church. Lanterns glowed in the windows, while Lark's choir sang songs of thanksgiving. The pews were full of familiar faces, ranchers and merchants, miners and teachers, all joined in community. Caleb sat near the back, watching his daughters shine in the warm lamplight. Mara stood tall in her sheriff's coat, discussing winter preparations with Jonas. Lark's fingers danced across the organ keys, her face peaceful. Juniper sat with her young students, teaching them to braid corn husks into dolls. His heart swelled with love and gratitude. These strong, beautiful women had grown from those tiny babies he had found in the snow. They had faced darkness with courage, chosen mercy over vengeance, and helped build a community where justice and kindness flourished. Mara came to sit beside him, slipping her hand into his. The organ music swelled softly, and Caleb leaned close to whisper, "I saved you once, but you saved me for 30 years." She squeezed his hand tight, understanding all the love contained in those simple words. Around them, their neighbors sang and children laughed, and hope filled every corner of the lamplit church. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.